Firebase, it's your boy OSAS, and in today's episode, we are going to continue with our chat room messages pagination. In the last episode, we handled the logic inside of our message service that it's supposed to help us actually batch and paginate messages. In today's episode, let's go right ahead and plug that into our chat room screen. So right now, the focus for today is, let us look at this right simulator here, which is the completed version of our project. As you can see, the way we are paginating for more messages is by pulling down and getting more messages. I would like for us to focus on actually adding that pull down to refresh functionality into our chat room screen. And so we're going to jump into our chat room view model and actually plug this get historical messages method and use that to actually fetch messages. So the first thing we're going to do is, of course, to go straight to our chat room view model. I'm going to go ahead and do that by Command Shift and O, and I'm going to search chat room view model, jump into that file. So now that we're inside of our chat room view model, let us look for the method that's responsible for getting messages. So it looks like it's this get messages method. I'm going to command and jump into it. And as you can see, we are calling the get messages method that is inside of our message service. I am going to comment out this get messages method, and I'm going to go ahead and actually use the get historical messages one. And let's go right ahead and actually construct that logic. So we're going to say message service, the get historical messages. It's going to say for which channel we have a channel inside of our chat room view model. It's going to ask for a last cursor. Let us pass in nil for now. I just want to make sure we test that this, get historical messages method is actually working. And then for page size, let us just make it something like 5 so we can see something small. And let's go right ahead and it's going to return the messages or the message node. Okay, so we're inside of this closure. What do we want to do with this message node? If we think about it, all we want to do is to convert this message node into our actual messages array. And the way I'm going to go right ahead and do that is, let's see, I'm going to say self self.messages dot append contents of message node dot messages. I think that's pretty much all that we need. And then I'm going to say self dot scroll to the bottom, or I think I'm going to copy this method right here, paste it there. And I think that's good right now. Let's go right ahead and run our project and make sure that this get messages method is now working with the updated version. And so this should give us just the 5 most recent messages. Let's jump into this QA user 27, which is a group chat, right? And as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 messages, which is perfect. For me, for the demo purposes, I've gone ahead and actually numbered this stop data that I'm actually using. And as you can see, I can tell that the last item is actually 100, which is correct. So this is perfect. We know we're actually getting 5 messages. Now, what I want us to do is when we pull down on this pull to refresh, I would like for us to fetch more messages like we're doing in the completed version, right? If I pull down, I'm going to fetch more messages and I'm still going to stay at the last item that I was at before I actually pull down. So let's go right ahead and actually implement that logic. The first thing that we need to do is, as if you can remember, inside of the message service, we have this concept of this, current cursor that I explained in the last episode. And it's essentially where are we stopping? You can think of it as the current page of, where we're actually paginated. And I'm going to need to store that as a property inside of our chat room view model. So I'm going to scroll all the way up here and I'm just going to declare, let's see. I'm going to go right ahead and declare a private property, and I'm going to call it current page. You could call it current page. You could call it current cursor. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure you're storing it inside of your chat room view model. It's going to be an optional string. So let's go right ahead and take this current page. Let us jump back to our, get messages method. And so now I'm going to need to store this current page somewhere. Or where am I going to get this current page from? Well, thankfully, our message node, if you remember, the node has this concept of current cursor. So then I'm just going to say the current page is just essentially equals to this, message node.current cursor. So we need to optionally unwrap this because we're using capture list to create a weak self, a weak reference. And so let's see, this is still yelling at us, but it should go away now. That is perfect. Okay, so with this now set up, I'm going to pass in the current page in here now as the last cursor, right here as the parameter of our get historical messages method. So we have this nice setup going on, but we still have a couple of more work to do. And the next work that we need to do is actually going to be inside of our messages list controller. Remember, we're using a UI collection view now. And I'm going to Command Shift and O and jump into our messages list controller. Inside of our messages list controller, let's scroll up here. If you remember in the last episode, guys, we have this refresh data method that's inside of our message list controller. And this is essentially what's responsible. This is what's called every time we pull down to refresh. And I can show you what I mean by putting a print statement here. And you see that this print statement is going to fire whenever we actually pull to refresh inside of our chat room screen. And so all we need to do now is to take this pull to refresh functionality, map it into our chat room view model, map it to that function that's responsible for pagination, and we should be good to go. So let's look at the print statement. I'm going to expand the console, put that print statement in here, filter for it, and then when we pull to refresh, look at that. As you can see, it triggers refresh data, which is perfect. So we know we have the right method. Now, what do we want to do inside of this refresh data method, right? Like that's the real question. All we really need to do is something like view model dot get messages, or get more messages, something like that. And that should go right ahead and call that get historical messages method again, using the current page as the the next place for it to start pagination from. And the way we're going to do that is we don't currently have any get more messages method inside of our chat room view model. Let's go right ahead and fix that. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our chat room view model, and I'm going to create this method called load more messages. And let's see, what do we want to do in load more messages? Essentially, we want to call this, this get historical messages method again. And how do we go about doing that? So there's a couple of things that we need to do. Actually, you know what? Before we even get to this load more messages method, let's use this one for now. Let's use this get more messages or get messages method. I'm going to indent this. Okay. So let's go right ahead and actually use this one inside of our message list controller. So I'm going to call get messages method, and let's go right ahead and actually, launch our application on the simulator, pull to refresh, and let's see what happens. Jump to the channel tab screen, jump into this massive channel, and let us pull down. Look at that, guys. We have more messages. And as you can tell, there's a bunch of, weird stuff going on right now. First off, we have a duplicates. We have sounds like you need a break, number 96. Look at that. We have number 96 here again. What about number 100? Also, why is the order of our messages all messed up compared to this version that we have here? So many questions, right? Well, let's go right ahead and fix that one by one. The first thing I would like for us to actually fix is to remove this duplicate here. So we have this duplicate and we have this duplicate. And the reason we're actually getting a duplicate is inside of our message service. And the way to fix that is actually much more simpler than you would think. So for example, when we do have a last cursor, so it means, for example, when we go in here, right, we don't have a last cursor right now for now. When we pull down, we now have a last cursor because we just paginated. So we know we're in the second page. And the way we're going to do that is, the way we're going to fix for that duplication is we need to remove, we need to remove the duplicates by saying let's filtered messages. I'm just going to say filtered messages is equals to, if the last cursor is not equals to nil, meaning if we're paginating for more messages, if it's equals to nil, I'm going to just return messages. If it's not, equals to nil, I'm going to say messages that filter. And what do I want to filter for? Well, I want to remove the duplicates. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to use this shorthand syntax. I'm going to say if the ID of the messages is not equals to my last cursor, because remember my last cursor is just a message ID. And really what's going on in our project is if we go to Firebase, let's say we jump into channel messages node, and let's say, for example, we jump into this channel node, right? We're essentially going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We stop at 5. This 5 is now our last cursor or our current page. And then when we pull down to refresh, we start from this 5 again. We say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now that 5 is going to be a duplicate data. So we need to remove that key, or we need to remove that last cursor. So that's really what I'm trying to do here. So now instead of just getting, just passing back the messages into our message node, I'm going to pass in the filtered messages. And I believe that should solve our issue. So let's go right ahead and run our project. That should fix the duplicate issue. And then we're going to go right ahead and fix, the issue with the actual organization or the arrangements of our messages. So right now it's properly arranged, right? We have 100 to 96. If we pull down, look at that, we have 95, 93, but we no longer have duplicate 96. I don't know if you guys noticed that. In the first time we ran it, we had this duplicate 96, which is good. So let's go right ahead and actually fix and sort this messages properly. And what's really going on, I actually believe, is if we jump into our chat room view model, the way we're appending our messages here is actually incorrect. So right now we're just appending new messages to the end. Think about it for a second, right? When we're actually paginating, we're actually not appending messages. We're actually inserting them. Because remember, in the completed version of the project, we're getting older messages. We're not getting newer messages. We're scrolling up to historical messages. So when you scroll up, when you pull down, you're actually supposed to insert message and not append. So you're supposed to insert more message at like index 0, right? And so it makes sense for us to use the insert method instead of the append method. And I believe that's what's causing our, the arrangement or the sorting of our messages to be all messed up. So we're going to go right ahead and say insert. And we're just going to say contents of message node dot messages. And it's going to ask for what index? We're just going to insert at the beginning, meaning at 0. So let's go right ahead and run our project and let us see what is going to happen next. So if we jump to our channel tab screen, we go in here and let us pull down. Look at that, guys. 100 is still well arranged. That's perfect. Let's pull down some more. Look at that. That is awesome. Pull down again. Look at that. As you can see, the messages are actually properly arranged and there's no actual duplication. I'm not sure why that is disappearing. We're going to debug that in just a minute, but there should be no weird stuff going on. Let's pull down again. Look at that. If we pull down again. Okay, that's awesome. Next bit of the equation that we need to fix is, let me go ahead and remove our console and let's see if there's anything going on here. Nothing. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do now that we're actually properly able to pull down is, let us try with a larger data set or a larger page size. So instead of using a page size of 5, let us use a page size of 12 and let us see what that looks like. Okay, jump into our channel tab screen, jump into this massive channel. Again, we currently have 12 messages fetched. And if we pull down, we're going to get 12 more messages. But as you can notice, it's kind of disorienting because you don't even know where was the last place you were at before we pulled down. In an actual messages application or in the completed version that I have, notice, for example, we had like number 8 right now. Number 8 is the last item here. Notice that. If I pull down, it should still stay at number 8 and just append more messages in front of number 8. So if I pull down, look at that. Actually, that jumped a little more than I wanted to, but let's try it again. Let's say we go into this channel and let us pull down. We're at number 84, right? Look at that. It stays at 84. You notice that? Scroll down. Look at that. We have 65. Let us pull down. It stays at 65. Okay, pull down some more, 46, it stays at 46. So this logic of actually staying or keeping the last position that you were at before you pull down to refresh for more data, let's go right ahead and actually write that logic right now. And let's jump into Xcode. The way we're going to do that now is we need to know, so let's go into our message list controller. I'm going to go into message list controller. And how do we actually get the sort of like the index that we were at or the last position that we were at before we did our pull to refresh logic? The way I'm going to do that, is I'm going to set or create something called last scroll position. So I'm going to scroll up here inside of our messages list view controller or messages list controller, and I'm going to create a property here, and I'm just going to call this private var last scroll position. And this last scroll position, let's make it a string. And again, this is just going to be a message ID because remember, I just want to know which item I was at before I actually pull down to refresh for more data. So where am I going to set this last scroll position, information? And the way I'm going to do this, honestly, is I'm going to go into a ChatRoom view model, and I'm going to create another property that lets me know when I'm actually paginating. And then I'm going to listen to that property, and that's when I'm actually going to set this last scroll position. Another way we can actually, before we even do that, this last scroll position, we can actually set it inside of our pull to refresh. We're going to go back and do the other logic I just mentioned, but here's how we can actually do it really quickly. So when you pull down right here, right while you're pulling down, remember we're calling this refresh data method. This refresh data method is actually what's firing that, right? We can set the last item, this number 67, for instance, as our last scroll position, right? And then we can now scroll back to that position when we're actually done fetching our data. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to jump into Xcode, and I'm just going to go right up here, and I'm going to say the last scroll position. What is it? It's just going to be our view model, the messages.first. and .id. I want that ID, the ID of the first message. Because think about it, right? Inside of our similar right now, our first message right now is actually number 56, this message right here. And when right before we pull down, we know it's 56. So we can store that as our last scroll position. And right after we're done pulling that down, we can scroll back to that. So it doesn't give it this jumpiness or like this loss of, scroll content position that we currently have. And let's go right ahead and actually use this last scroll position. So remember, just before we set this last scroll position, we said we wanted to set a logic that actually lets us know when we're paginating. Let's go and do that. Let's jump into our ChatRoom view model, and let's scroll up, actually. Let us go right ahead and create another property that is going to actually let a user know or let us know when we're actually paginating for more messages. And I'm just going to make it a publish property. And I'm just going to say, let's see, is paginating. And it's going to be false, of course, initially. But how do we set it's paginating? Well, all we got to do is go into our get messages method. So I'm going to look for get messages method. And the way I'm just going to set this is paginating is I know it's paginating if the current page is not equals to nil. So I'm just going to say right here, when we call this get messages method again, which remember, we're calling this get messages method when we actually pull down right here, because we're calling it view model to get messages, right? And all I'm just going to say is it's paginating if the current page, which is our last cursor, is not equals to nil. That means we're paginating for more, right? And then inside of my message service get historical messages method, then in here I'm going to say self.isPaginating is actually false because it means we're actually done fetching whatever we wanted to fetch. So I'm going to go ahead and actually remove this old comments just to give us a little bit more space. Let's remove this method for now. We're going to go back and use it in upcoming episodes. And okay, so we have this isPaginating method, which is property, which is going to let us know when we're actually paginating for information. So let's go right ahead and actually use this inside of our message list controller. Remember, I just declared it as a publish property, which means it's a publisher, so I can actually listen to it. So I'm going to jump into my message list controller, and inside of this function here, where we're actually setting up listeners, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm just going to say view model, but this time around, we want to listen to when its pagination is changed. And let's go right ahead and use this debounce logic as well, just to keep things consistent. So I'm going to just copy this debounce up here. And let's just sync into it, of course. Create a weak reference because we're good developers and we don't want memory leaks. And now that we're in here, it's going to return us is paginating. Okay. So what do we want to do in here, right? First things first, let's go right ahead and actually unwrap self. Second thing I want us to do is to unwrap our last row position. I'm going to say let's last scroll position. Okay, now that we have a last scroll position on wrap, I'm going to say if it is not paginating, I would like for me to scroll. So when it's done paginating, essentially, right? When it's paginating is now false, it means we're done paginating. We just pull down and now it's false, right? I would like for us to scroll back to, so for example, when we are at number 34, once we pull down, we're done paginating. I would like for this to scroll back to number 34. And I can't find 34 anymore. See what I mean? It's all disorienting. So it's essentially a way for us to keep the current scroll position. And all we got to do is actually just scroll our collection view to that index. So I'm going to say the index is going to be equals to index view model, get our messages, and give me the index for when the messages is actually equals to our last scroll position. Last scroll position. Because remember, the last scroll position is just the message, first message.id right here. So by getting this index, we're just saying, give me the index of this, for example, right, when we pull down number 23, right? We're saying, give me the index of number 23 and scroll to message number 23. That's all we're doing. That's all we're trying to do right now. And so, okay, we have the index. What do we want to do with the index? That's the real question. Let's unwrap this and return out of the scope if for whatever reason we are unable to get the index. And so all I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to say self.messages collection view. Let us scroll to item at, it's going to ask for index and let an index path. Let's create an index path right up here. It's pretty simple. We just say index path and we initialize a new index path using item and row, item and section. And the item is going to be the index that we just created. The section is going to be 0. And let us go back and pass this index, scroll to, oh, actually, we're not even trying to scroll to last item. I'm sorry. We're trying to scroll to item. So collection view have and collection view and table view have the scroll to item method. We're going to scroll to item at this index path. And let's see the scroll position. Let us make it top. And the reason I'm making it top is because in the completed version of the project really quickly, as you can see, when I actually pull down an item, right, it keeps it at the top, right? It doesn't scroll to the bottom. It anchors it to the top of my screen. For example, look at that again. As you can see, number 8 stays at the top. So that's pretty awesome. So I want the scroll position to stay at the top. And do I want it to be animated? No, I don't want it to be animated. I don't even want it to be that noticeable at all. And all I need to do now is I'm just going to say self, the pull to refresh dot hand refreshing. So I'm going to remove this, hand refreshing stuff here, this messages collection view, the hand refreshing. I'm going to remove that from this refresh data. I want this is pagination logic to be the one to trigger it. And so I don't know if that explanation is good enough, but I'm going to go ahead and explain it after we're done running this project to make sure everything is actually compiling. Then I'm going to explain what is actually going on. And so this is yelling at us. It's saying messages dot first index. Yeah, that's our index. The ID is equals to last scroll position. What am I getting wrong here, guys? Let's see. What is index right now? Oh, index is message, messages first index where, I suppose, actually, what am I doing wrong? Hold on. Oh, index right now is message. I'm just going to call this last message. But then I need this at the index path. So what am I doing wrong here? Let me take a second and think about this. Oh, okay, that makes sense. I think the reason is because index right now, we're using the first method instead of the first index method. There's a first index method, and this is going to get us the actual index. So that should fix it. So let's go ahead and run our project. And like I was saying, actually, you know what? Let's stop this. We need to store this. So I'm going to copy this right here and just paste it right there. We're just going to store it in our subscription. And let's go right ahead and run our project now. And, once we're done, I'm going to explain what's going on. Jump in here. So we are at number 89. Let us pull down. Look at that. It stops at 89. Do you notice that? It didn't jump. 78. Let's do that. Let's pull to refresh. Okay, that jumped a little bit. I didn't really like that. 67. What about that? That did not jump. 56. That did not jump either. 45. That did not jump. 34. Look at that. Stays at 34. 23. Stays at 23. 12. Stays at 12. Number 1. Look at that. There we have the older messages that we sent a while ago. And this is our first item. That is awesome, guys. I don't know if you guys paid attention to that because prior to this, when you would pull to refresh, right, it would just insert the new messages in front of your first item, right? And the content offsets or the scroll position will get all messed up. With this logic, all we're doing is essentially anchoring our scroll position. We're saying, okay, we're at number 89 right now. When I pull to refresh, stay at number 89 because it would be very disorienting if I have to go figure out where I was at when I was actually scrolling down a message or scrolling up a message. So let's try it again. 89, pull down, 89 stays the same, 78, pull down, 78 stays in the same position, 67, pull down, it's still 67. So as you can see, we can actually have a very usable pagination logic here, which is awesome. And so let's jump into Xcode, and I'm going to explain the logic that we just created. Essentially, what we're trying to do is pretty simple. Inside of our ChatRoom view model, right, we are setting a Boolean logic that lets our messages list controller know if we're paginating or not, or if we're done paginating. So is paginating, right, we're saying it's going to be true whenever you fire this get messages method for the first time, so for example, when you get into our chat room view model for the first time, this initial batch or this initial pool, as we're calling it, is paginating is going to be equals to false. And why is that? It's going to be equals to false because current page is nil. And remember, current page is the same thing as the last cursor concept. It's like, what was the last item that we stopped at our pagination? And so since this is our first item, or this is our first batch, it's actually going to be equals to false, which is okay because we're not pulling to refresh yet. However, when we scroll up here and we actually pull down to refresh, by the first fetch, we already have a current page now, right here, right? By the first fetch, when we pull to refresh, its pagination is going to turn to true. But when we're done paginating, remember this get historical messages is a closure. When it's done with all of its functions and stuff, it's going to return its value inside of this closure, and then we set its pagination back to false. Thankfully, this is a publisher. So inside of our message list controller, we just go right ahead and set up a listener. We're just saying, okay, I want to know when we're done paginating. That's essentially what this is doing. And once we're done paginating, I want to scroll to the last position that we were at before we began the pagination. So I want to know when we are done paginating. And then I want to scroll to the last, or to the first item that we were at before we pulled to refresh. So using this simple logic here, we essentially have a very nice pull to refresh functionality that mimics, pagination. The other option that we have is there's a way for you to actually do this without the user having to manually actually pull to refresh, but we're going to talk about that in the upcoming episode. And the last bit of the equation that I want for us to actually do is if I jump out of my besties and I go right back into my besties and I scroll up, as you can see, we have this nice prompt that says pull down. It's sort of like a prompt that lets the user know you can actually pull down for more messages. This is a component that I decided to add, and it just gives it a very nice little, intuitive experience. However, I'm going to stop this episode here because this video is already long. In the next episode, we are actually going to have this, pull down prompts, and then we're going to clean up more of this pagination logic. Thanks for watching as always, guys. I appreciate all the support. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.